I keep the camera up high. They won't see me burping either, it appears. Aha. Ah.
Hello, Your Eminence.
Hello, Your Affluence. Guess what I'm doing right now?
It sounds like you were flushing the toilet.
No, I'm eating lunch. So go ahead and say something erudite.
Well, how about you do a quick summary of General Jones and his role in setting up the Marine Corps Intelligence Agency as a backdoor into the disappearance of the plane MH370?
Apparently you didn't hear me say I'm eating lunch.
All right, I'll do it then.
Yeah, good idea.
Well, as I understand it, you and your erstwhile colleagues in the Marine Corps Intelligence Agency have somehow managed to set up a black hat trap. And as I see it as a layperson, which means sometimes I'm horizontal on the ground thinking, I imagine that in a hierarchical military organization, it's almost impossible to set up a black hat trap to catch people inside the organization because you have a chain of command that can be compromised. So the only way to do that is to set up a black hat trap outside the organization from people who were previously inside it. So I congratulate you, Field, because I feel, whether consciously or unconsciously, and who knows, because of the superb quality of the chaff you generate, who knows what you've done or how you've done it, but it appears that you've walked the black hats associated with the hijacking of MH370 into a trap that they're going to have a great deal of difficulty extricating themselves from without exposure. And let me try and explain, and you can tell me when you've finished eating if I've got it right. When MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur and reached cruising altitude, I believe the Black Hats, led by Serco director Maureen Baginski and the grandson of Winston Churchill by the name of Nicholas Mycroft Soames, Mycroft is the nickname we've given him, their plan was to hijack the plane using free flight maneuvers developed in Montreal in Canada and take it to a destination, perhaps an Air Force base near Beijing, offload the free scale semiconductor employees and take the plane back into another free flight maneuver and dump it in the ocean north of Malaysia, where it could be discovered and the hijacking attributed to the suicide of the pilot. Now, did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Right. So the obvious strategy for people inside or peripheral to the Marine Corps International Agency is to take what was a black hat conspiracy exploiting the free flight hijack maneuvers developed in Montreal in Canada and re-hijack that aircraft and create a very embarrassing situation for the perpetrators of the black hat attack by flying the plane into the command center of the black hat operations in Diego Garcia in the British Indian Ocean Territory in the Indian Ocean. How am I doing so far?
You're doing well, and I'm masticating, but I'm going to ask at this point that somebody who's good with software, if they could go to the advertisement for this show right now and capture the picture of the insensitive statement by Serco and British Airways encouraging travelers to discover the British Indian Ocean. And if nobody can get it done before I get done masticating, I'll get it done. You're doing well, David. Continue.
Thank you. So we have the original black hat operation, which has been subverted by the white hats, where the free-scale semiconductor employees were going to be taken off and put into forced labor at the fabrication plant of Freescale in China. And of course, setting up a fabrication plant for Freescale semiconductors in China is totally consistent with the treasonous activities of Bill Clinton and his patent lawyer wife, Hillary Clinton, and their deployment of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John Shalikashvili, to Beijing in 1997, where this turkey gave a presentation to the People's Liberation Army University in Beijing, at the end of which he said, "I have been instructed by my president to leave behind details of all America's weapons programs," which, when you think about the combined salaries of the American intelligence agencies, you're not exactly getting a big bang for your buck in the United States of America, but perhaps the citizens will wake up to that sooner or later. So the hijacking, the free flight hijacking of MH370 was subverted by the white hats, and it was re-hijacked and flown towards Diego Garcia, and a satellite hovering in geostationary orbit immediately above Diego Garcia, operated by the British company Inmarsat, one of whose directors, I forget the name, it's a woman, is also a director of Orbital Sciences of Dulles, Virginia, who went into a joint venture with McDonnell, Detweiler and Associates of Richmond, British Columbia, to develop the free flight techniques that were used on 911. Now, ostensibly, Orbital Sciences of Dulles, Virginia is all about developing software and methods of intercepting incoming ballistic missiles. And McDonnell Detweiler is about developing public key infrastructure keys that allows a trusted third party to authorize Outfit A to communicate with Outfit B during the 911 war game, which was converted by rogue forces to an attempt to overthrow the government of the United States. So it's quite interesting that Inmarsat has one of these people on board, particularly when you think that Orbital Sciences was sued by the police department and fire department pension funds of New York for fraudulent misrepresentation in respect of the revenues of McDonnell Detweiler, but I digress. So the plane is flown in the radar shadow using free flight maneuvers developed by McDonnell Detweiler and Orbital of SQ-68, Singapore International Airlines 68, towards Diego Garcia. So how am I doing so far, Phil?
You're doing very well, and I want to direct your attention to an image. So look at the chat room if you're in the chat room. Are you in the chat room?
I'll try and get there now.
Okay, I'll be patiently masticating until you tell me you're in the chat room.
Okay. Getting there.
Masticating.
We're quite a team.
Yep, you fumble technology and I eat French fries, and we're setting the world on fire. Dare I say red hot.
9, 10, 4, 9.
David, are you being attacked by the RCMP?
No, I'm grunting with the effort of remembering my passwords. I am in the chat room. Now what?
Look up, go to the bottom and scroll up until you see a little girl in a red dress looking at 4 Marines.
Okay. Aha.
Okay, look directly below that. Do you see a British Airways ad?
Yes.
Read the ad.
Oh dear. Escape the commute and discover the Indian Ocean. Yeah, well, I'm afraid the British have actually disgraced themselves. You know what? I'm a British citizen, and I quite buy into this notion of willing suspension of disbelief, but the Brits really are asleep at the wheel. I mean, how have they allowed this progression of sabotage, assassination, and deception to go through 2 world wars, you know, the attack on Pearl Harbor, to cozy up to their ostensible allies and then betray them left, right, and center? You know, so you've got the British Indian Ocean. Well, let me just go back to these maneuvers. So the MH370, a Boeing 777-200, operating under free flight rules, as it approaches or comes out of the IAP profile, instrument approach procedure profile between waypoints driven by the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, as McDonnell Detleider said in its press release of the May the 3rd, 2001, we are working with air navigation data of Ottawa for the final approach procedures. And the final approach procedures for these aircraft is when you switch over to the triaxial gyroscope systems inside the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, and the triaxial gyroscopes whose patents were brokered by Hillary Clinton into Thales and various other suppliers to the Chinese People's Liberation Army, allows you to take an aircraft and do the refresh cycles for the control flaps at 40 cycles per second. The advantage of that is you don't need very large excursions of any of the control flaps, which at high speed near the ground would result in the flaps being torn off because, as I understand it, not being an aerodynamic engineer, if you run into dense air at high speeds, there's a very tremendous pressure on the control flaps, and they're not designed to hold that, so they just fly apart. So you need the very high refresh cycles with the QRS-11 gyro chip, and Hillary's taking care of that. So you can bring the plane down to a Category 3C landing on Diego Garcia. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it has a 12,000-foot runway, correct?
I think it's 12,200, but let's stipulate out of court that it's 12,000.
Right. So it lands. It's got 229 passengers, crew and pilot. The presumption would be they'd all be alive, albeit they'd have nothing to do with the controlling, the landing, the taxiing, and the parking of the aircraft. Incidentally, the word parking reminds me that because Serco likes to have armed paramilitaries in the vicinity of targets for the point of view of intimidation, Little Barry and his cronies in Chicago invited Serco to do the parking meter collection. So Serco has a perfect alibi to put some paramilitary jerk, probably a lesbian, on the streets of Chicago, watching the citizens where they park and handing out parking fines, which then goes into the Serco coffers in the UK. So it's rather a hoot to think that Little Barry, a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies, could get his private army inside Chicago to intimidate his victims. But anyway, I digress. So the plane is taxied into, I think they call them a deployable mobile hangar, normally designed for B-2s and Stratofortresses, but obviously could be extended in size because neither the B-2 or the Stratofortress is as large as a Boeing 777-200, but that's not a problem. And once inside, then we have this interesting dilemma, because the black hats did not expect the Boeing 777-200 to taxi into a hangar on the British Indian Ocean Territory, because that's highly embarrassing, because the British Indian Ocean Territory is part of the global conspiracy to set up an offshore command center that's practically impregnable to maintain the power of the Anglo-American alliance and the City of London Livery Company. But that's the beauty of a skillfully built white hat, black hat trap. So congratulations to you, Phil. Over to you.
Yep, that's me, Mr. Trapper. Trapper John, MD. This is called word association. You know, I think I'm going to go out after our interview yesterday with Carrie Cassidy on the Camelot project or whatever it's called. We're getting sort of busy. Have you noticed, David? Because on Monday we do our show, and then we immediately follow our show, and so the chat room can just stay put because we will be going to the Sovereign Independent in England to be interviewed by Neil Foster. And Neil Foster is one of the editors, I believe, of the Sovereign Independent. And he's going to do us one at a time, and I don't care who goes first and who goes second. And I don't think he cares either. But you and Neil can figure that out. So on Monday, we'll be having a daily double. And on Tuesday, Tuesday, we'll be having another daily double. We won't be doing our live stream show unless hell freezes over or the wreckage or the aircraft MH370 is found. If either of those, if legitimate, credible evidence of its destruction or if credible evidence of its still being in one piece and parked in Pakistan, like a retired three-star general named McInerney has expressed today. Again, he's been saying that all along, so who knows, maybe it's over there in Pakistan, and maybe they want it photographed in Pakistan so they can take the Tel Aviv twin. Anybody who understands what I just said, Tel Aviv twin, please mention it in the chat room so everybody else can understand what I just said when I said Tel Aviv twin. So if you get pictures of a Malaysian 777 sitting in Pakistan, preferably in a very hostile part of Pakistan, and then suddenly an Air Malaysian 777 is photographed flying into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, or perhaps Timoye's headquarters at 1455 K Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., well, then you're going to get all the sleepy people in the United States of America and Canada and Western Europe to think that some really bad people attacked America. Well, it'll be true. Those bad people include Serco and British agent Barry Swatero. Notice for the record, I didn't say Barack Obama or anything about his Indonesian Muslim raising under the transvestite Turdy, and I certainly didn't mention that Romney's cut out of the same bolt of cloth because his tag team partner in '68 was a guy named Pardo. Pardon me, boys, at the Chattanooga choo-choo. Yeah, yeah, man, track 29. Boy, you can give me a shine. Anyway, you can't say boy anymore, but I can because I'm 12 years ahead of you-know-who. I was at Punahou in '67, and he showed up late and graduated after chooming and skipping class. He graduated in '79, so in 12 years, I will no longer, if he catches up to me within the 12 years, I will no longer be able to say things like, Barry Soetoro can kiss my rosy red rectum. David, over to you.
Yes, Phil, that's absolutely right. And of course, we mustn't forget to mention that the Nicholas Soames technique of pedophile grooming and pedophile entrapment extended to the Hilton Hotel in Lahore. Great name, Lahore, isn't it? When you think about what the behavior of little Barry's mother was. She was acting as a pedophile pimp in the Hilton Hotel, Lahore, entrapping various members of the Pakistan intelligence agency, I guess, ostensibly 5 years with the Department of State on the taxpayer's dime, which is pretty bizarre for a second-rate microloan woman, a communist, at a 5-star or 4-star hotel for 5 years. Anyway, so she brings in little Barry, and by then I guess he's 20, rough, give or take a bit. And they developed this technique that's centuries old, that the British have been very good at, of taking the best hotels in the world, which inevitably attract the high-value targets, politicians, lawyers, military folks, people, and then putting a child in their rooms and getting the witnesses. And basically, you take over the career of the politician or the military guy for the rest of their life. So it's really a very, very powerful technique. Anyway, Ann Dunham and little Barry Soetoro, they're obviously expert in it by the time he came back. I think when he came back, he pops off in a Fulbright scholarship to Occidental, then Columbia University in New York, and then the overseer of Harvard University, the first non-American actually a Canadian by the name of David Johnson, invites Barry to Harvard to complete his legend in preparation for his run as a junior senator from Illinois. And David Johnson launders him through Harvard, and he comes out a very charismatic, urbane kind of guy who in his life has done precisely zip. And I haven't yet met an American, or anyone for that matter, setting aside, the personal opinion they might have of Barry, who can tell me what he's done. And of course, for a community organizer, they don't do anything. They rub raw the sores of discontent. They say to the blacks, the whites are coming for you. They say to the whites, the blacks are coming for you, etc., etc. And that they, because of their unique insider knowledge, which in case of Barry, unfortunately, involves rectal interference with heterosexual human beings, as a result of their insider knowledge, they can make things happen for the two parties. Oh no, what's going on there? Theo, can you take over while I don't know what's happened?
Of course you don't know what's happened. That's why I'm seeking somebody that can do a better job for me. By the way, for a couple of new people, one named Brian H. and one named Andy B., I'm trying to accommodate the request to take care of getting Brian H. into this chat room of ours. And so David picked a real bad time to have his dog poop on the floor or whatever happened. And I'm having a bad, hey, never mind. In fact, David, are you back already?
Yeah.
Oh, good. What happened? Did your dog just poop?
No, I don't know. I mean, the internet, I think I'm surrounded by alligators, and the internet is a little beyond my pay grade, but never mind, I'm back. So we got this extraordinary situation where the white hats in the Marine Corps Intelligence Agency have built a trap for the black hats. So instead of having an aircraft deposit 20 free-scale semiconductor employees in China, where they could continue work on the stealth bombing technology for the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and then you dump the rest of the passengers as corpses in the sea north of Malaysia, they've got a plane fully intact with passengers alive sitting inside a hangar on the British Indian Ocean territory of Diego Garcia, and acute embarrassment all round, leading all the way up to the former Minister of Defence in the John Major government, Nicholas Soames, the Mycroft character, as we've selected or attributed. And unfortunately for America, in 1978, this turkey was personal assistant, and I'm always a little suspicious of that term. I might translate that into bum boy, but maybe that's vulgar. A personal assistant to Mark Hatfield, the late and former chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Now, 1978 is a very important year for a variety of reasons for the United States of America, because that was the year that General Alexander Haig made a proposal to the Bilderberg Conference in the Chauncey Conference Center at Princeton, New Jersey, where the late General Alexander Haig said, and of course I'm just a fly on the wall, he said to the assembled throng, "I believe that Americans are stupid enough to accept a being their character as president. And we can arrive at that if we who come to the Bilderberg Conference carefully play our hands such that increasingly incompetent individuals are presented as viable candidates to run as president of the United States. And gradually, it's like that, I think they call it the boiled frog technique. As you gradually heat up the water, the frog doesn't quite understand it's being boiled until it's too late. So the American people are dropped into the political crucible of third-rate individuals running for office and gradually lower the bar until, I don't know how low they thought they might sink after Clinton. And Bush was not a bad guy, and you know and I know that fellow, he has done something, because unlike the grifters Bill and Hillary, who are lawyers, and unlike the grifters Barack and Michelle Obama, who are lawyers, albeit they were disbarred, I believe, in around the 1991 period, actually, as I understand it, George Bush plays a good hand of poker, and he can fly a fighter aircraft. Now, Field, do you know anyone that does not deserve some respect in their ability to handle something like a fighter jet? Over to you.
Well, if I said it takes something special to handle a fighter jet, I'd be effectively kissing my own rear end, so I won't do that. But what I will do, because I've never flown an F-102, I'll point out that the F-102A, and right there's a lesson to be learned. Old pilots have a cliche, never fly an A model. And what that means is they don't have the bugs worked out of it. But in the case of the F-102, they only made the A model because apparently they made it right the first time. It was made by Convair, correct me if I misspeak. It's called an F-102 Delta Dagger. What made that a little bit more difficult to fly than a conventional fighter is that it only had one wing. It's called a delta wing, and watch how fast one of our agents, especially if Jack Mack is here. Oh, there's a Ginger Cookie giving me a goodbye kiss. Yeah, that's Ginger Cookie, all right. I recognize what's not visible. Anyway, that right there, by the way, is the easiest airplane I've ever flown in my life. That F-16 on the second lesson in that aircraft, you were by yourself. That's how easy it is to fly. If you can think, David, that's great. How did you get that so quick? You're a klutz.
Because I'm smart.
Oh, okay, you're a smart klutz. What can we tell, David? I'm going to put you on the spot now. We can tell something about that F-102 simply because of its paint job. What does the paint job tell us? Anybody in the chat room, go ahead and guess.
It's a frustrated chess player.
No, the orange panels mean that it's a target or it's an experimental aircraft. And they want the aircraft to be very, very visible. And even though George Bush could fly one of those things, guess who shot one down, David? You get one guess.
The mighty Field.
Yep, and it was in October of '82. And you can figure out how I celebrate if you're good at math, because I shot an F-102 out of the sky at Tyndall Air Force Base in April of '82, and my first child was born in January of '83. So, David, you claim to be a good mathematician. Have you figured out the celebratory after-flight exercise?
Well, I know what I'd do in a celebratory after-flight exercise, but I don't know what you'd do.
Well, you're not very good at math. I just told you that I shot it down in April of '82, and my first child was born in January of '83. So how many months are between those dates?
April, 9 months. That must have mean that, yes, well, I better not go there. That's biologically, you were biologically animated. Is that possible?
You're not going to believe this. Some of the people will believe it. I don't expect you to believe it, David. I will tell you this. The reason I'm always talking about smoked oysters, and keep in mind my call sign in the F-16 was smoke, and I won't go there either. I think people that are well aware of the way we write have already figured it out, and the new people would be offended at first, so I won't offend anyone. I'll just sit here and tell you that that F-102 was probably a target drone, and if I get the link to that picture and see when the picture was taken, I'll know for sure. Either that or it was a test aircraft or a chase aircraft. And if you want to see what a chase aircraft looks like, go to YouTube and get the YouTube for the B-70 crash. What happened there was a F-104 chase plane got too close to the wingtip vortices, I believe, of the XB-70 Valkyrie, and they collided, and thus ended the Valkyrie B-70 program, which is probably okay, because I think Russia and the United States have more in common than some other parts of the world. For instance, we're known as a Christian nation, but I would say we're Christian by default. We're a Christian nation only because we're not yet a Muslim nation or an agnostic nation. I think the church is more active in Russia, but we don't need to go there. I'm very pleased and surprised that you found that picture because the airplane on the top was the last one I flew in the military, and the airplane on the bottom was the first one I shot down in the military. David, over to you.
Well, that's right. And I'm intrigued by the psychology because various parts of my career I've hunted for people with an excess of talent to task them in a fairly challenging way. And it's no good fishing for mackerel when you need a shark or vice versa. So if I wanted to have some kind of chance, let's say I was gifted with a bit of foresight to have a president who might be able to defend the United States of America for a simulated attack on 9/11, I'd want George Bush to be in charge. Because I think to be able to fly an aircraft like that requires a lot of very, very good decision-making skills. And I would say in that area, and we all have our particular focuses, but in that particular area, the guy's a genius, as you are in your particular area. And perhaps I am in my other areas, but that's kind of by the by. Now, can you imagine, let's put a collective challenge to Americans or their friends in the Anglosphere, if you put Barry Soetoro in a plane like that, the expression on his face, it would be sheer unadulterated terror. He'd wet his pants, maybe the second degree. What that means effectively is America has totally the wrong kind of person in the White House to deal with the strategic challenges that face it today.
Okay, let me update you. Do you know what strategic challenge we're facing from North Carolina to New York City at this very moment, David?
Go ahead.
The BSers, and that means Barry Soetoro and his group, they claim there's a submarine off the East Coast and they anticipate a missile launch. Well, I've already gone to abledanger.net and stopped their stupid missile launch by referring to the submarine as Serco's sub. Keep in mind that nobody can move nuclear property without Serco knowing, and nobody can launch nuclear property from the United States without either Serco's monkey boy or the military authorizing it. And my guess is that on August 30th, 2 days before the attack was supposed to go down in Syria, the attack that McCain and Lightlofer Lindsay wanted to have, keep in mind that Lightlofer's, who's 56 years old and he's never been married, but that's okay, we average out because I'm 64 years old and I've been married 3 times. So on the average, we probably got 2 marriages apiece. Would that be right? No, 1.5. 1.5, yeah, because he's a 0 and I'm a 3. Okay, but anyway, the fearmongers in London, they realized that the MH370 deal not only is not going to float, but the discovery of the technology that allowed the MH370 false flag BS story, when that's revealed, and I believe it will be soon, I hope so, when it's revealed, it automatically collaterally exposes 9/11 because it was the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot that did 9/11. And if anybody anywhere in the world wants to argue that with me in front of 3 against 1, by the way, I'll give you 3 against 1 odds. And we can do that in front of a camera with a moderator anywhere in the world. Anybody wants to have, anytime someone wants to have their ass handed to them. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I'm just picking up on a post. I put it in my paste. It is not Iranians, but Israeli agents and Zionist propagandists like Rupert Murdoch who are the real authors of false flag terror plots involving airliners being flown into high-rise towers. Now, that's a statement, and I'm not going to attack the person who made it, but I just want to pick that over and give an alternative view. Now, Rupert Murdoch studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University. I don't know whether it was under a Rhodes Scholarship, but let's pass on. Someone else who studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University under a Rhodes Scholarship before he was kicked out for rape and drug dealing in 1969 was Billy the Lip Clinton. Someone else who studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford was David Cameron, the present Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. If you follow these characters, you can see something is happening at Oxford, whether it happens before, I don't know, that grooms these people to be at crime scenes, apparently with an alibi. Perhaps they're running a newspaper articles, or perhaps they're sitting in a hotel thousands of miles away from the crime scene. But they have direct access to the triage teams that go into a crime scene with an alibi to be there before legitimate first responders. And I'm going to come to someone who is really quite shocking in respect of MH370 and a particular crime scene that may exhibit those characteristics, who also studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University. But let's just take 911. There were cameras at the Pentagon City Hotel, operated by the Starwood Group, overlooking the Pentagon lawn, that would have captured the deployment of triage teams on the Pentagon lawn before the bomb set by AMEC, the British company, and Serco went off in the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center. So there was an opportunity there for the people who were pointing the camera to generate images that could be used in the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history, quote, Dr. Thomas Barnett, Office of Naval Intelligence, or something equivalent. So where would those scenes have been broadcast to, or webcast, if you will? Well, it would appear that the Red Switch network, procured by Nicholas Soames and installed by Serco at places such as the British Indian Ocean Territory of Diego Garcia, and RAF Oakhanger in the United Kingdom, and Guam, and I believe Fort Belvoir, which I believe is in DC somewhere, or Virginia.
Northern Virginia.
Okay, in Northern Virginia. All of these places were linked by the military through the Red Switch network, where the military, and perhaps that's the Eisenhower military industrial complex of which he was so concerned, they give permission to politicians to communicate through those secure networks with each other. And of course, politicians are not necessarily in office at that particular time. They might have been in office. And of course, they may not necessarily be in government-controlled agencies' buildings, as in Washington. That means the Red Switch network, to be truly successful, to communicate or allow communication between the military people who are more or less on deployment most of the time, and the politicians or ex-politicians who may have retired, you've got to be able to get hold of them quickly in order that you could, let's say, coordinate the coup d'etat. So lo and behold, the Pentagon City Hotel, run by the Starwood Group, linked through Serco satellites, is linked up to the Port Douglas, Queensland Hotel on the morning of 911, where, depending on your point of view, a high-value guest is squatting on his bedside, maybe in the arms of whoever his current affection was, watching on the screen the attack on the Pentagon before it happened. And that individual studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University in 1969 before they kicked him out for rape and dealing in drugs, where he didn't come back to the United States. He went to Moscow, where he met with KGB representatives, presumably to discuss how to debrief John McCain in the Hanoi Hilton. So the man is a traitor and a scumbag. Well, we know that, and his name is Billy Clinton. It's kind of frightening when you think that what damage he did to the Republic in his 2 terms of office. But anyway, he's a lawyer and a scumbag and a drug dealer and a rapist, and he moves aside, and George Bush comes in, who I believe is very capable, faults, of course, individual because he can fly a jet fighter, which would scare the proverbial out of me, and basically beyond the capability of, I would think, 90% or 95% of American citizens. But of course, George Bush can now be vilified by people who study philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford. But we should always remember that the founder of the Rhodes Scholarship, Cecil Rhodes, said at the top of every tree, there's an Oxford man except for science. And this is their Achilles heel. Now, whether I'm a great scientist or a good scientist, I'm a competent one. And their hideous problem for the black hats of 911 is they've created an explanation that contradicts the basic laws of science, conservation of energy, matter, space, and time. And on MH370, they did, because what they've claimed is that MH370, having got this extraordinary embarrassment of the complete plane in a hangar on the British Indian Ocean territory of Diego Garcia, they have to think of a storyboard that could delude the public into believing that it's not on the island intact. Because it would be exceedingly embarrassing, of course, if the white hats blew the whistle when the black hats had all done their propaganda stuff and claimed that the plane had crashed in the north, in just south of Vietnam. If they suddenly produced the plane on the island with all the crew and the passengers alive. And of course, that's what I believe the white hat approach is with the black hat, is to bring the asset back to the command center on Diego Garcia. And then while everyone is still hunting, and let's say today is the 28th, it was hijacked on the 20th. So for 3 weeks, a Boeing 777-200 has disappeared in spite of the billions, if not trillions of dollars of intelligence money invested in satellites and surveillance planes, etc., meaning that precisely every dollar spent by every country in the civilized world on defense has been wasted. That's staggering for me.
Wait a minute. Did you say staggering?
Yeah, staggering.
That's my department, not yours. You sit there and pay attention.
All right, thou shalt not be staggered, Field.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we have Billy the Clinton, studies philosophy, politics, and economics, and learns the value of the Oxford School of Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. And unfortunately, the name escapes me, but a woman professor that tutored Billy Clinton and Rupert Murdoch and David Cameron, I think she was at Anne's Oxford. She was, it would appear, a member of the Hitler Youth, the Hitler Jugend. And she's a Jewish woman. Now that requires some pretty deft footwork if you're a young Jewish woman in Nazi Germany not to end up in a concentration camp, but somehow to survive and then get hired by the British to work in Berlin in the Red Cross in 1947, and then come to the UK and get hired at Oxford University to teach philosophy and politics and economics to the likes of Rupert Murdoch and the rapist Bill Clinton. Because what are you teaching these people if you end up with the moral code of Rupert Murdoch and Bill Clinton? It can't be something particularly profound or spiritually elevating, because these people are scumbags. So Oxford University has betrayed itself, and through the Rhodes Scholarship has actually put a whole bunch of people at the top of every tree except that of science. Now let me just do a little riff on a guy in Australia right now who apparently is pretending to be, and he must be following instructions, to help bail the black hats out of their problem on how to dispose of MH370 in sufficiently remote place that if they can spin it out, they can say the batteries have gone flat in the black box, so we didn't get any ping, but we are 100% certain it's in the southern Indian Ocean, but the weather's bad and we're sending ships and boats and we haven't found anything. So for the first time, I think, in human history or aviation history, you got a huge plane with no evidence that it ever crashed. And that's the last desperate hope of the black hats, that they can get the public to go back to sleep. And I don't think they're going to succeed. What do you think, Phil?
I don't either, but I'm busy allowing some new guy. That sounds disrespectful. You know, it's disrespectful of you to make me do something while I'm busy. But I'm getting some new person, I think from England, whose name is Eric. And I don't remember for sure what his last name is, and I'd never say it if I did. But I'm sending him his credentials to get in here. Oops, I made a mistake. So I'll give it back to you, David. I can't do 17 things at once. Over to you.
I want to quote the monk Rabelais, because we're talking about scumbags, and I hope people who are easily offended, but this is I don't know, he's a medieval priest or something, and he said that he who uses paper on his bum shall find his bollocks lined with scum. You ever heard that, Phil?
No, but I wish you wouldn't have shared that with me. I'm busy. I'll tell you when I'm not busy. You're causing me to make errors in technology.
Okay, so the man in Australia who's busy trying to flesh out the black hat legend of a Boeing 777-200 having been hijacked, we don't quite know how, and then flown for 6 hours, we don't quite know how, and then crashed in a sea that is so, a part of the sea that is so remote, no one might casually, either through satellite or ship or plane, have ever picked up any of the wreckage of the stuff and never heard a ping. That man's name is Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister of Australia. Now, if I'm correct in the theory that someone is teaching these students of philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University the techniques for subverting and ultimately overthrowing sovereign states, we should look at Tony Abbott's past and see if he was in the vicinity of any crime scenes which lend themselves to this idea that if you can get a triage team in position at the crime scene before legitimate first responders, you can place evidence, you can remove evidence, and you can make sure that the people who might otherwise serve as expert witnesses are dead on departure from the crime scene. So it's rather disturbing to find out that Tony Abbott was at the site of the Bali bombing. And I can't prove it, but I would think that Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister of Australia, had a key part in the planning of the bombing. And the bombing was executed through the Zigbee community of Serco. Let's just look at some of the numbers. Let me just quickly redefine what a Zigbee is. A Zigbee is a contraction for a zigzag bee. And zigzag bees in the animal kingdom are little creatures that fly off. Well, they do a variety of things. They have a very narrow set of subtasks to keep the hive happy. And if they don't do what they're supposed to, they're killed. And if they do what they're supposed to, they get rewarded. And apparently human beings, unfortunately human beings, can be manipulated to behave like Zigbees. You just need sex, fear, greed, or power as the principal drivers. And most of us slot into one of those categories or others, and we become Zigbees with the willing suspension of disbelief. We do exactly what we're told, and we don't reveal the underlying conspiracy. So in the case of the bee, for example, there's one group of bees that go out spotting, as I understand it. They fly around looking for flowers with a nice load of pollen on them, and having identified a good clump, of such flowers. They fly back to the hive, and they have to communicate with their mates inside the hive, who go out and do the retrieval, the hewers of wood and the something of water. And what they do is, when the spotters return to the hive, they sit on the ledge of the hive and they point their faces, or their bums, one of the two, into the hive, where the other end is pointed in the direction of the flowers rich in pollen. And then what I find totally fascinating is they flap their wings at a rate that indicates the distance to the flowers. I don't know whether faster is further or faster is nearer, but it's immaterial. So you've got the azimuth and you've got the distance that is communicated to the people, the bees inside the hive, who then go off and bring the honey back. And when the honey comes back, sorry, not the honey, the pollen comes back, there's another group that, build the honeycombs and put the stuff together in it and then tend to the queen and the various things. And apparently there are killer bees in there that they're checking that everyone's doing the right thing. And if they're not doing the right thing, they kill them. And I find that very, very close to that analysis that we've done years ago of spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil, where spotting is you're identifying your high-value target, and that's the only task you do. The shooting, in the case of human beings, is where the camera crew is in position to record the hit or the key act of intimidation, like the bomb in Bali, because without those images, the teams don't get paid, because they cannot produce the proof that the job that they were tasked with was done. And there's an analogy there, Field, maybe you could just mention that, of the cameras on the guns in your father's aircraft. Could you just do a quick summary of that?
Yeah, in World War II and since, if anybody came back from a mission and claimed they shot something down, they would have to be able to prove it with film. And what David's alluding to is my dad, who got shot down in April. Are you still alive, David, or have you fallen off your stool?
No, I've got a creaky chair and I have to move because I'm human.
Well, I think you should go to a furniture store and check some stool samples and find something that doesn't creak. But having said that,
maybe you can give me a lubricant.
Well, I have a lubricant every night. In fact, I don't have a glass here. I've got a bunch of glasses back here. And let me just go sideways on you, but right there in that box, there's a bunch of koozies. There's some glasses, and the people coming to the plunge will get a pair of koozies, a glass, and I think I have enough copies of this movie left. And this movie is played all over Western Europe, but apparently it can't be played in America because somebody in America, maybe it's Rupert Murdoch, maybe it's that short little twerp named Kissinger, some Nazi somewhere doesn't want the American people to know that in March of 2007, Captain Sherlock solved 9/11. So we only have a few of these left, and Neil Slade, if you remember that name, David, he told me not to distribute any more of these. So if I distribute any of these during the Plum City plunge, or to Larry and I forgot his wife's name on purpose, but they're either Texas Maverick or Desperado. There's a couple down around Waco, Richardson, Waxahachie that has a box of treats coming, including 2 glasses, 2 koozies, 4 Abel Danger shirts, and one of these, and a partridge in a pear tree. So I'll get that box mailed one of these days. But anyway, you earned it by being the 3 millionth viewer and by getting a screenshot of the 3 million views, which I posted back a chapter or 2. So David, what was your question? And I'll give you a very laconic 20-minute run-on answer.
That the idea of having a camera at the occasion of the money shot is absolutely vital, because in the case of the military, of course, that's a proof of killing. But in the case of organized crime, you'll need that to get paid. Over to you.
Yeah, and you were asking about my dad's airplane. It was a B-24 Liberator, and that's a 4-engine piston-driven. Of course, everything was piston-driven. during World War II, with the exception of the Me-262 and the let me think about that, P-59. That was the American jet, and those things didn't get produced in numbers. Having said that, my dad, for whatever reason, was selected to have it was either a one of a kind B-24 or one of just a very, very few, like 3 or 4 at the most. They took the nose turret out, and watch how fast someone gets us a profile from the side of a B-24D Liberator. Oh, my back just creaked. Between your chair and my back, we need some WD-40. Either that or a martini, that would work. But my father's airplane, they took the turret, that's the rotating gun that goes up and down on the front of the B-24 Liberator, which will be coming up here momentarily. And I promised to filibuster until somebody posts a picture of the B-24 Liberator. So anyway, they decided that the enemy of the United States in the Pacific War was Japanese merchant vessels. The enemy of Japan was the military naval vessels. And so there were two different strategies, and history proves that the United States had the better strategy, and that's not to besmirch. Oh, I got to check something there. That looks like a pair of 44s. Hang on, David. No, it's more than a pair. Yeah, I thought that. This is why they decided to stop serving alcohol on bingo night. That's really cute. That'll be in chapter 21. In fact, a lot of this stuff will be in chapter 21. But back to the B-24, the American Volunteer Group, AVG, over in Kunming, China, Kunming, they decided that they wanted to launch some long distance patrols out over the China Sea, and they wanted to go after some merchant ships with a great big cannon. So they stuck a GBC, great big cannon, on the front of at least one B-24. And then my dad, who was only 20 years old at the time, think about that, folks. I mean, the whole airplane, 10 people, 12 on the occasion of his ditching. There were 12 people on. A couple guys went for a joyride and didn't come home because 10 out of 12 of the people in the airplane died. So here's my dad, the 20. In fact, I think somebody has a picture of my dad's airplane. I mean, someone here in the chat room, but it may not surface. He's driving along like this, and what he's got is a great big cannon on the center line of the aircraft where the nose turret used to be. And you got to put it right smack on the center line, because when you start firing a large weapon that has a lot of recoil, if you have it off to the side, it'll cause the aircraft to turn. And the United States of America learned that again when they built the A-10 Warthog, because conventional landing gear, they always put the nose wheel on the center. Well, that didn't work because they took the nose wheel and put it on the center. So I'm now an airplane, and you're looking at me, and the nose wheel is directly on the center of the aircraft. And they put the gun on one side on a Warthog. And what happened, the gun's so big that when they pull the trigger, it rotated the aircraft. So then they had to go back to the drawing board, and they put the big gun on the center line, and they put the landing gear off to one side, so that when they pull the big anti-tank gun's trigger, it stays on track. In the case of my dad's airplane, the trigger was on his yoke. This is what you steer big airplanes with, a yoke. And I'm not yoking. So he had a trigger there. He had a gun sight right up in front of himself on the windshield that would help him put the crosshairs on the target, pull the trigger, and blow him away. And he did it twice. And this is going to sound like I'm bragging for my dad. I'm not. I'm just in a very unique position, and I know who put me here. And it wasn't my dad, my mother, my sister, and myself. I'll leave that an open question for those of you who don't believe. My dad actually shot down two four-engine aircraft from another four-engine aircraft. He only got credit for one. Why do you only get credit for one? Because he got a picture of one falling apart right in front of his airplane when he blew his brains out, their brains out. Then he got another picture of going on the second one, and I think these were Kate's, maybe. We'll find out because I'm going to post a link as soon as I come up for air. But the second aircraft that he shot down, he didn't get credit for because it flew into a cloud, and when it came apart, it was not visible on the camera. So instead of shooting down two four-engine airplanes with a four-engine airplane, he officially was credited with shooting down one four-engine airplane from a four-engine airplane, and that was the only case in World War II where a four-engine aircraft shot down another four-engine aircraft. Is that significant? No. It just proves to my satisfaction that I am put in this position to not only engage in an argument, but to win it. So David, over to you. You do the work and I'll do the funny stuff, and together we'll win.
Well, you see that story, and it goes back to that comment that I made back in December of 2006. Thank God that you and I met, because that has the absolute ring of truth, but more particularly, it has a very powerful inside view of the kind of dynamics that the black hats have been using today to create these false flag or free flight events, where the public thinks one thing because they're shown images that have been forged and manipulated through the camera. And so I'm very disturbed, and I can't prove the guy's guilty or innocent, and correlation is not causation, at the frequency with which these people who bubble to the top of governments, Stephen Harper in Canada, Barry Soetoro in the United States, David Cameron in the United Kingdom, and Tony Abbott, who's now the Prime Minister of the of Australia. And I'm just reading from the news article. An emotional victim of the 2005 bombing in Bali told on Tuesday of Tony Abbott saving his life by organizing an emergency medical evacuation to Singapore. Paul Aniksich, whose life as a leading lawyer in the New South Wales city of Newcastle was ruined by the bombing, also told of Mr. Abbott sitting at the end of his wife Penny's bed for hours, comforting her as she believed she was dying. Now, at one level, of course, does that make Tony Abbott a hero? Well, it makes him, it would appear to be a kind individual, a fairly organized one, but it begs a certain number of questions. If you're organizing an emergency medical evacuation to Singapore for bombings in Bali, in Indonesia, is it possible that some of the expert witnesses who saw what really happened in Bali have either been killed after the bombing itself or shipped out to Singapore and killed in Singapore? Now, is that being fanciful? Well, look at the 7/7 bombing in the vicinity of the Edgware Road underground station. The bomb goes off, apparently synchronized. 3 bombs go off at the same time at widely different places. The injured come out of the Edgware Road, and in a sense, they're exfiltrated or extricated from the vicinity of the crime scene. They're not quizzed, certainly the ones who are not injured, by the police to determine what they saw or what they heard. And they're taken across the road from the Edgware Road tube station to a triage centre. Now, I don't know what the Brits are smoking, but it turns out that the triage centre has been set up in a Marks and Spencer store. I always used to buy my underpants in Marks and Spencer's, and I think they made pretty good underpants, but I never saw the staff of the Marks and Spencer store as particularly qualified to set up a triage centre. And then the ones that came out of the Marks and Spencer's triage centre, presumably some of them died in Marks and Spencer's, and again that begs the question, was anyone interviewed in the Marks and Spencer store to find out the kind of injuries they saw of the people who died? But anyway, the people who were deemed not to be worth killing or having died were then transferred not to a hospital, but to the Hilton Hotel. And the Hilton Hotel in those days, at least the chain outside the United States, was run by Ladbrokes, the world's largest retail bookmaker, which of course is exceedingly well qualified to do spread betting and spot fixing with electronic tags attached to body bags. So if the punters decided that they wanted to pay out to a spot fixer, if the spot fixer could arrange for, let's say hypothetically, 54 either filled or partially filled body bags, then Ladbrokes would be the place to go to. And since that Ladbrokes owned the Hilton hotels, same chain that owned the Lahore Hilton, where the pedophile pimp mother Barry Spatero hung her hat in the early 80s, then you could probably make a great deal of money as a spot fixer by making sure that there were precisely 54 body bags with body bits inside belonging to a single individual. So you got the area around the alleged bombing by three guys carrying, well, one guy carrying a satchel with a bomb in it, notwithstanding that those witnesses who were able to get some evidence through to the public at large say the bomb went off under the floor of the railway carriage, presumably built by Bombardier. You've got a lot of evidence and witnesses being taken care of in the Marks and Spencer's underwear section by making sure that the expert witnesses who might report such are dead on departure, and then others who would be obviously fairly traumatized inside the Hilton Hotel, controlled by Ladbrokes, which also controlled the Langham Hotel in London. I think it bought the Langham Hotel from the BBC in 1988. Does it matter? Well, I suppose it does matter when you think that the Langham Hotel would have been used for the purposes of pedophile entrapment by the necrophiliac Jimmy Savile, just across the road from Broadcasting House, which has a statue on it by Eric Gill, who's a hero of art moderne, or whatever it's called. Invented the, I think the sans serif script, or maybe it's the Gill script, but had a nasty habit of sodomizing his daughters and his dog.
And you have a nasty habit of moving stuff around on your desk.
Oh, I do. Okay, sorry, I'll back up. And so we've got the people being whacked in the Marks and Spencer store, intimidated in the Hilton Hotel, and the stiffs taken off to an organization that has been erected in the grounds of the Honourable Artillery Company with a temporary power capability provided by a Glasgow-based company called Agrico that was exceedingly versatile, because a few weeks later they shipped out 400 tons of mortuary and temporary power equipment from Agrico to New Orleans to take care of the anticipated 60,000 dead. When I say anticipated, Hurricane Pam, the simulation before Hurricane Katrina, did some back-of-the-envelope calculations which suggested if they could get a flood of 15 feet deep in the low-lying parishes of New Orleans, they could kill 60,000 poor blacks and poor whites. That's, of course, just a simulation, pure coincidence. But of course, to get 60,000 dead, you'd need to make sure if the hurricane missed New Orleans, as it did, it went 80 miles to the east, and 21 hours before, the levees were blown up in 4 places simultaneously, and Hillary Clinton's director colleagues at Lafarge managed to arrange for a Lafarge barge to go through the walls of the industrial canal in an attempt to get the 15-foot elevation, depth of flood needed to kill 60,000 poor blacks and poor whites. So what a funny thing that a British company should be consulted by this wonderful word, United States authorities, for its expertise in putting the morgue facilities together for the 7/7 bombing in the Honourable Artillery Grounds, and should then, and I think that that company's name is De Boer, and the temporary power facility is from Agrico, that it should then be invited to deploy its mortuaries and its power facilities to New Orleans, it makes you wonder what they knew in New Orleans, because why wouldn't they ask George Bush, President of the United States? Well, they didn't ask George Bush because they wanted to embarrass George Bush. They wanted this white heterosexual fighter pilot turned president to look as weak and incompetent as stupid as they arranged for him to look when he was reading the goat story in the elementary school on the morning of 9/11. Because the game plan of these people who study philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University is not integrity, it's not truth, it's not science, and it's not justice. It's the manipulation of public perception with rhetoric and various other argumentative techniques to create an opportunity to have absolute power over the masses, extended quite possibly to putting them in concentration camps or nuking them. So I need my voice resting. Over to you, Phil.
Yeah, whenever the shit gets deep, I have to take over. So I'll take over like I always do. I'm going to go looking for a file right now. And this is interesting historically. It may not be interesting to everybody. In fact, I'm not sure I can find it, but I think so. I think I just put a picture up where, yes, here it comes. And I know there's a couple people over in England that are interested in the historical perspective of World War II. Of course, they had a lot more at risk in World War II than we did over here. I'm not going to put any comment on this in writing because I want everybody to see this picture as soon as they can. But I was talking about how my father's airplane, there it is, Sweepy Time Gal. This is what was left of it when the Japanese pulled it out of the water in the South China Sea. And why did the Japanese go to the effort of pulling this specific airplane out of the water? They knew by tail number and by nose art, that's not Noah's Ark, it's Noah's art. They knew that the Sweepy Time Gal was really creating havoc for their merchant shipping. And they didn't know what type of a gun was on the front of that thing, but they wanted to find out. And so they knew where the aircraft was ditched. And when I say was ditched, that's a euphemism I'm using in honor of my father because he actually crashed. But it would seem like I was being disrespectful to my father to say he crashed. But let me set up what exactly transpired here. He had his great big gun, great G, big, yeah, his GBG, his great big gun. He saw a Japanese or a Nippon or a meatball. He saw a Japanese merchant vessel. So he came down here at wave top height and goes boom, 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 and he sinks some vessels. And then one day he was out with his big, great big gun, GBG, and he's tracking. What tracking means, well, you guys know what tracking means. He was tracking this ship and he was solving the azimuth and he was solving the geometry. And he had just pulled the trigger the first time, like boom, and suddenly he heard a bunch of noise from behind him, and three Japanese fighters were shooting. And the first time they came around shooting, three of them, three against one. See, that's not good odds. If you're a good fighter pilot, you don't need any help. But anyway, these guys were weak, so they had three of them, and then they had my dad out there. So the 20-year-old kid from California is flying around in this 1943 B-24B, and he hears ready tat tat, ready tat tat, and then he sees the airplane. Here's the airplane again. You're the ship, and he's aiming at you, and he goes boom. Then he hears ready tat tat, ready tat tat, ready tat tat. And his airplane starts flying sideways. Guess why? Number 3 and 4 engine had been shot out by the Japanese marksman, who apparently had a nice stable platform to shoot at. If my dad had known they were back there, like if the tail gunner had mentioned, hey Glenn, there's a bunch of Japs trying to attack us, my dad would have started going like this. My dad now here is a man. To me he is everything strong. That was by Paul Peterson. Anyway, so my dad's sitting there, and as he sees these three Jap fighters go flying by and then turning back to the right and climbing, he thinks to himself, self, if those three guys shot out 2 of my 4 engines on their first pass, Do I want to hang around here and let them shoot two more out? Can I outrun them? Can I get to dry land? I don't want to hang around. I can't outrun them because it's flying sideways. I can't get to dry land. I know. I think I'll ditch it in the ocean. So now I got to get a wing on this thing so you guys can understand what goes on. Oh, here's a really nice wing. Okay, here's the wing of a B-24. Keep in mind, my dad is 20 years old. He probably has a grand total of 300 or 400 hours of flying time, a lot which would have been at altitude cruising. And so his airplane's flying like this. Okay, you with me so far? He's yawing because he's got a lot of power on number 1 and 2, trying to keep the thing flying at all. And I didn't say atoll, which reminds me, the guy that plays the string bass in this, whoever did that song, New World in the Morning. They're from Australia. Somebody knows out there. Ginger Cookie knows. Everybody's talking about a new world in the morning. Anyway, whoever plays that string bass in that, the lead singer's name is Judith Durham. Cute little item. The string bass player is Athol Guy. I don't think I want to be named Athol because somebody might think that somebody's lisping at me and calling me some derogatory term just because I can beat the brains out of Barack Obama without lifting a finger. There's a finger for you. I got another real dandy if you want to see it. Okay, here we go. We're flying sideways. We know those Jap fighters are coming back. We're going sideways like this. My dad's trying to ditch it. Why is he trying to ditch it? Because he didn't want his guys to get killed. There's 12 guys in this airplane. Also, he's the captain of the airplane. He doesn't want to get himself killed. And there's an old adage in flying. If the captain survives the flight, the odds are good that everybody else will too. Not on this date. They go in like this. The thing's flying sideways. I'm sure not only my father, anybody else would try to keep the wings level and hit with the wings level, but it's difficult to do it when you have no experience and you have two good engines on this side and two bad engines on this side. So when he gets down there towards the water, it does one of these numbers like this, and this wing right here hits the water first, and that causes it to go like that. There's a name for that. It's not cartwheeling, but it's something similar. So anyway, the airplane, you can see in the pictures that the airplane was stressed a little bit. Some of the front end of it fell off. And when the airplane hit the water, 8 out of the 12 men were killed or were trapped in the airplane and drowned. Either or, they're just as dead either way. And they've been just as dead for some 70 years now. The accident, or it wasn't any accident, the Japs did it on purpose. No offense to Japanese people, but back then during the war, when we were lied to by the bankers, and the bankers in England who set up World War II told the American young men, those nips want to kill you. And of course, they're telling the young Japanese young men, those Yanks want to kill you, when all they wanted to do is control the world and profit from both sides losing because they had insurance on everybody. And now to speak fluent Chinese, I will say they had insurance out the yin yang. So anyway, my dad's airplane hits. 4 people survive. You remember those 3 fighters? Oh, okay. The fighters, they're strafing them in the water. You remember the ship that my dad had just fired on when he went boom like that? Well, they didn't like these guys too much either. So that ship came to where the aircraft was, and the 4 guys that are evading the fighters that are strafing them, the 4 guys in the water, now they're targets for small arms fire from the Japanese maritime vessel, which is a violation of something. I think it's called the Geneva Convention. But anyway, it doesn't matter. War is hell. That's why we shouldn't be having any more of them. And by the way, Pat Tillman died because he wanted to be an anti-war activist. Well, I'm not a ranger, but I'll stand up and take his place and stand in the gap. And gap's an interesting word because there's a pine gap in Australia. There's a gin gap in Greenland, Iceland, Norway. And then there's a popular type gap. And I think that Ginger Cookie is mature enough to understand where I'm going with a popular type gap. So can you put up an image? I see Ginger Cookie just put up Judith Dunham, Morningtown Riot is your favorite. Okay, I'll put that one in chapter 21 for you. Thank you very much. Okay, the guys are bobbing around in the water. The ship comes over and shoots 2 of them. My dad's thinking to myself, okay, now there's 10 out of 12 dead. I think I will demonstrate to these Japanese guys with small arms just how good I am in the ocean, because fortunately for my father, he grew up in Santa Monica, California, and he spent most of his time when he should have been in school down at the waterfront, swimming and doing other things, I'm sure. So that's the story. I don't know how we got on that, David, but I guess somebody said something about my father's airplane. Oh, I know what it was. You wimped out on me and said you had to take a break. Okay, I hope your break's over, David. Over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me, Phil?
Of course I can hear you. I'll never leave you or fail to hear you.
Excellent. All right, so let's see, it's 12:20. So let me just focus on Prime Minister Tony Abbott, the man who studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University and was at the occasion and crime scene of the Bali bombing, in position, if he so chose or if he was so ordered, to interfere with the evidence from the witnesses that might otherwise have identified the perpetrators of that attack. And it's my allegation now that basically he's contaminated or compromised by studying philosophy, politics, and economics in the same way that Bill Clinton was, although he only lasted a year because he was kicked out for rape, and Rupert Murdoch and David Cameron. And incidentally, just to remind people, one of the aides of David Cameron at number 10 Downing Street was recently arrested for having or loading or producing or transmitting child pornography on his computer in number 10 Downing Street. So the tentacles of the octopus reach right around the various parts of the anatomy of David Cameron, and I don't want to go any further into that. But let me come back to Prime Minister Tony Abbott. He says, and remember, the Rhodes Scholarship talks about, well, it basically infers from the will of Cecil Rhodes that at the top of every tree there is a Oxford man except for science. And I just want to point out why it is very clear that Prime Minister Tony Abbott knows zip about science. He says, Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott says authorities are throwing everything we have at the search for missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. And that's the problem, Tony. You're throwing everything you have to look for it, but you're throwing very little by way of forensic intelligence and analysis as to why you're looking in the wrong place. Because you have listened to the theory put out by the Black Hat team at Inmarsat that they were unable to locate the azimuth of this plane from the pings generated by the Rolls-Royce Trent engines. As though, and it's manifestly absurd, there is only one satellite up there that could receive those pings or monitor them, because if there's two or three, then you can do what the non-scientist might not understand as triangulate. So the Black Hats know exactly where MH370 is. And the challenge, when it is produced, and it's going to be produced by Field's erstwhile colleagues in the Marine Corps Intelligence Agency, that's what I believe, I can't prove it. When it is produced, it's going to reveal the number of Black Hat players who conspired together to create the erroneous, felonious theory that the plane was hijacked by a pilot who was suicidal and dumped in the ocean north of Malaysia. And that's the essence of a really first-class Black Hat trap, that you attract, it's another name for it is the honeypot, all of the people who shouldn't be there spinning the story that is manifestly designed by the propaganda machine back in London, which has been doing it since first commissioning the sculptor to carve the little boy, naked little boy, outside Broadcasting House before he went home and sodomized his dog. And there's a nice vulgar expression for that in Australia. But it's 12:25, Field. What do you want to do now?
I want to post a picture of my dad going to his final resting place because a couple of people from England were intrigued seeing the pictures of his two airplanes, which you might take a look at in the chat room. Um, and one of the reasons I'm willing to do whatever it takes to expose Barack Hussein Obama as a British agent, as someone who needs to be arrested by the military and face charges not of treason because he's never sworn an oath to the United States of America, um, but he would be guilty of wrongful death for every U.S. serviceman who's been, or woman, but serviceman means men or women. He should be charged with wrongful death for every U.S. service person who's died overseas in combat operations or in training accidents since the 20th of January of 2009. And I say that because he's serving as the President of the United States simply because he's a British agent of the Crown agents in Serco, who to this day have run the United States of America as a wholly owned corporation. And I've got a message for Barack Obama, the British cabal, the Crown bankers, and Serco. Kiss my ass. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And just a little further up, well, there was some discussion about mechanical engineering and whether objects should be moving or not, and whether you use duct tape or WD-40 to get them to stop moving. So that triggered a memory. I worked with a very nice guy called Charles Scott, who's dead now, unfortunately, but he had applied for a patent for a rail system in the United States, and he was awarded the patent, and he asked me to take care of designing and marketing the patent. So I designed a monorail system called the Elevated Adaptable Zero Emission Monorail. So people who are interested can look at it. It's eazeway.org. And this is a system that would provide near ground level transport above the median line of the highway at regional jet speed. So I was very proud of it. But typically when bright people run into the malicious cartels that control these kind of things, I ended up, amazingly enough, being taken to court and sued for the theft of Charles Scott's patent, which I was in a 50-50 partnership with him trying to develop. But anyway, that's kind of by the by. Back to MH370. So the theory would be, if the Marine Corps Intelligence Agency really has set a successful black trap, that the machine is sitting in a hangar on Diego Garcia, the British Indian Ocean Territory, while the Black Hats desperately cast around for a plausible scenario that would allow them to get rid of the aircraft in their command center, which is on the island, and dump it at a place sufficiently remote from Australia and various other parties that they could say, well, it took us, let's say, 28 days or 30 days to find it, in which case the battery was flat, a lot of it, the evidence was sunk, and it may be that they've taken a Boeing 777, stripped it, painted it with Malaysian Airlines colors, and put it on a boat, and I think that's one of your theories, Phil, and sailed it or steamed it into the general area where they decide to dump it. And so it will be the first time in history where the plane has basically disappeared but for a little bit of debris, when it's still intact somewhere else, with great embarrassment to the Black Hat conspirators. So it's 12:29. Over to you, Phil.
I know you're trying to get out of here, so go ahead with the clean conscience. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do something what we're not supposed to do. I'm going to play a YouTube. And the reason I'm going to do this is because a couple of people in England and a person or two in the United States or Canada have said some nice things about my father. And of course, that also would extend to anyone else. Oh, an error occurred. Good, I get to talk more. That would extend to anyone who served in the military of any country at any time, because right now, I'll be back in a minute. This is going to be on the screen. Okay, we're gonna have to stop a minute because it's not on the screen. Bear with me.